Hello, class. I'm going to introduce to you a really central and important aspect of our class, which is Writer's Workshop. And I know that some of you have had experience with this in other classes of mine, but we're going to experience it in a different way within creative writing class. And so I'm just going to kind of repitch it to you. And I want you to kind of ponder how in this particular situation, this is going to be a very valuable part of your experience. So we have two essential questions here. How can we evolve from perceiving ourselves as students to truly seeing ourselves as writers? And then secondly, how can we support one another and take advantage of being not only a writer, but also a part of a writing community? This specific task that we have in front of us of doing creative work, creative writing, is very unique. And we're going to do it at a level that isn't usually experienced at the high school level. What happened was in the 1970s, Iowa State University decided to try something new in their graduate program for writers. And if you're not aware of this, they still have one of the premier creative writing master's programs in the United States. And they began with a model in which they gave their student writers an opportunity to reach an audience before they would publish that piece of writing to their professors and then potentially, eventually outside in the world. And what happened was pretty remarkable. The level of writing elevated to a new level, and the opportunity for writers to have an audience of other people who are also writers and who could give them interesting and insightful feedback from a writer's perspective was very transformative. And after that, it became pretty standard practice in master's programs for creative writing for entire courses to be run as workshop courses. When I got my master's degree in creative writing, I had a number of classes where there were about 12 to 14 students, and all we did in the entire course throughout a semester was to do writer's workshops. So this is going to be really amazing, and you guys have already received your workshop groups via email. And so I want you to just kind of think about how you can create a culture within that group. And we are going to do a lot of cool stuff together. At the core of what makes Writer's Workshop work is really respecting each unique writer and honoring the fact that everybody's on their own journey. And we're in different places, we have different styles, we have a different process. And so there isn't a right way to do something. Everybody's going to have their own approach. And we want to make sure that that is respected within the workshop. The other thing that I think is really important to make a point about is that people have a right to write about whatever they want to write about and to develop themes according to their own mind. You can give them a reaction to that, but I don't want anyone to question, why are you writing about this? You can't tell someone else what to write about. It's a totally different focus to talk about what the writing is doing, what's happening in you as a reader as you respond to that writing, to give each other suggestions and to interpret what the other people are writing. But I don't want anyone questioning why somebody is writing about something. And also, don't expect anybody to write a certain way or to meet your expectations. Just kind of honor where they are in their own journey, and then we'll work on ways to give each other a response. All right, we have some very specific goals that I'm going to go through kind of quickly. The first one is to understand the value of both line editing and big picture feedback. So when you get a piece of writing from somebody in your workshop group, you are going to go through it and give a reaction line by line. And that could be commenting on a great word choice, or noticing an auditory image, or realizing that some rhythm is being created by parallel structure. Or maybe you have a suggestion and you're like, I'm not sure if this is quite the right word here. You can write a little list of possible other words that you might suggest. You might want to recommend that they use a line break. And so you can put a slash mark like this to indicate that there would be a line break. Or you could draw a horizontal line that would indicate that you think maybe there could be a stanza break there. There's also lots of opportunities to communicate places where they might want to infuse some more imagery. You can write little questions. What did you mean by this? Or did you mean for me to picture such and such? So there's a great value to going through and giving really specific line editing. But what really, really differentiates workshop from peer editing is this idea that you then take a step back and you think about the piece and you write some bullet points on the bottom of things that you would like to talk about with the writer. That's that big picture feedback. It might be about the tone. It might be about the development of the theme. It might be about, if it's a narrative poem, the arc of the piece. There's a lot of bigger picture things when we get into fiction. It might be characterization or the development of the plot. It might be about the setting. There's so many things that are not really things you need to talk about on a line-by-line basis, but that are more indicative of your response to the entire piece. So we want to give both kinds of feedback. All right. We're going to today, as I go through this, also consider some of the uniqueness of what Writers Workshop is, some of the potential challenges that are going to come to us as we're doing this, but then also really thinking about the incredible benefits of getting to have throughout the entirety of the trimester another group of writers, a whole group of writers, a smaller group within our large class that's going to be supporting your work as a writer. We also want to adopt this principle of sowing and reaping. So in the spring, farmers go out into their fields and they plant seeds, and then in the fall, they go and they harvest them. And when you're spending time with somebody else's piece of writing, you are planting seed. You are investing in that other writer. And then what happens is they're going to be willing to invest in you as a writer and to support you. And the more you give to your workshop mates, the more that you support them, the more they're going to be willing to give back to you. And so we want to definitely practice that. And then finally, I want you to perceive workshop participation as really an opportunity to build invaluable transferable communication skills. The availability of other people who you know care about your progress, and then the task of being able to communicate clearly and kindly your feedback, and then also to take critique and suggestion as well as praise from people. These are lifelong skills that you are going to need in your future as you're working in all kinds of different jobs. And I'll talk more about this later, but the potential for the soft skills, the communication skills that you can learn in a workshop setting are pretty amazing. All right, so there is a packet that is attached in Google Classroom that gives a very strong philosophical foundation for what we're doing in workshop. The front page, this is going to be a little bit sad to read actually, is about just the logistics of how we would do workshop if we were in my classroom. We obviously aren't going to be in my classroom, and so we're going to have to adapt that to a live setting of Zoom or any other interface that you are comfortable with for meeting with your group. And we're going to have to be digitally giving each other feedback rather than being in person. But that's what that first page is. And then the rest of the packet is just chock full of great ideas to help you understand the why of a creative writing workshop. So you guys are going to read through that, and the philosophy in there is going to drive our action. So please don't skim it over. I want you to really dig in with that. And I'm going to be asking you to take 3 to 5 highlights from that packet and write them down. You're going to share those specific things that really stood out to you in a couple of different formats. First, in a Google form that you're going to send to me so I know what stood out to you. And in that format, I want you to talk about the why. Why did that specific idea resonate with you? And then on Thursday, you guys are going to be meeting online with your workshop group and getting to know each other and talking about workshop. And so there will be also an opportunity to speak about that with your private group, just the 5 or 6 of you that are going to be meeting together. All right. One more thing, you can see a little instruction on here that I'm going to ask whoever's last name is first in the alphabet. So if you have an A last name or a B last name, you might be the one that you're in charge of setting up the meeting, whether it's in Zoom or somewhere else. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, that's no problem. You're going to delegate. So then I want you to find someone else in the group that's willing to do it. But this week, it's going to be your job to set that up. All right. Another thing that I'm going to ask you in the Google form, and that I would also love for you guys to talk about when you're conversing about Writers Workshop, are three things. And if we were in the classroom, we would kind of post these lists around the room on whiteboards so you can kind of visualize that idea. What are some of the obstacles that you could foresee coming up? Because if you can talk about those preemptively, it's going to set you up for kind of taking them down and not letting them be obstacles. And then what are the probable benefits? What are some things you think you're going to get from this? And then I also would like you to compare and contrast Writers Workshop from and with peer editing, which is really radically different. All right, here is our very famous, well-discussed Writers Workshop metaphor. We use the idea of a praise sandwich to describe what we do in workshop. And so one writer's piece of writing is discussed at a time. And it takes at least 10 minutes, sometimes more, sometimes 20 minutes to discuss one piece of writing. And everybody is prepared for that discussion. You don't get the piece of writing and then workshop it right away. You always need at least 1 and preferably 2 days to really do a real writer's workshop, an authentic writer's workshop. And so you've already seen the piece of writing, you have line edited it, you have made a list of things you want to discuss about the piece of writing when you get into the workshop. At the beginning of the workshop, the person is going to read their piece aloud, whoever the author is. And then they're going to become silent and not participate in the next part of the conversation, because you as the writer need to kind of remove yourself and be a listener, because otherwise you're just going to sit there and explain what you meant, which it doesn't matter what you meant, because if they're not getting what you meant, then you have to think about what you need to do to the words to make it mean what you want it to mean. So you're going to go into that pure listening mode and really just take in the conversation that happens. So while you as the writer are quietly listening to what the group is talking about, they're going to go through a 3-part discussion. And when I say discussion, I mean we're popcorning around the table. There's no table. We're going from person to person on the screen. And to start with, everybody, one at a time, back and forth, around and around, you're going to talk about what you liked about that piece of writing. You're going to build off of what each person is saying. And it's not one person just talking. Oh, I really loved this image. Yeah, and that connected at the end. Another person says that. Then another person comes in and says, yeah, the imagery is really great, but I also really loved the word choice in this piece. These are 2 words that really stood out to me. Oh, I thought the first line was so powerful. And it's going back and forth. Was your interpretation that this was about da 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 da? I loved that. In my mind, I connected this to my first day of kindergarten. Those kinds of things. Praise, very conversational. Then when that is done and everybody's shared something positive and you've kind of made sure that the writer knows that there's something of value in their work, that really opens the door to the meat of the conversation. And that's where you're going to get into suggestions, and they need to be very specific. You're going to talk about your interpretations of the piece and what you think it means. You're going to ask questions, not of the writer, but questions about the writing. In the very purest form of workshop, you are not allowed to use the word you, because you're not talking to the writer, you're talking about the piece of writing. So reactions, I actually prefer in a writer's workshop in the middle portion to kind of go through the poem line by line, stanza by stanza. Does anyone have a suggestion at this point in the poem? What kinds of things were you thinking when you got to this stanza? And really kind of going through it strategically is a great thing to do. Another good way to do it is to do a round robin where everybody shares a suggestion or critiques something, and then you go into commenting on each other's suggestions. At the very end, when you feel like you have all been able to share your big picture feedback, then somebody says, okay, I think we're ready to wrap up, and we're going to go back to praise. But this time it's going to be in a little bit of a different form. And what you are going to do is, as a group, you're going to identify 1 to 3 things that writer should not lose and should not change in the editing process. And so that would be something like, no matter what, don't lose the sassy tone, or no matter what you change, don't change the fourth line because that's our favorite. Whatever those two or three things are that you want them to keep, you want to make sure you articulate that at the end. And then, and only then, the writer is allowed to come back into the conversation and ask questions and engage with the rest of the workshop group and make sure that whatever they wanted from the group, they're going to get it if it hasn't already been discussed. And then the writer goes home with all that feedback and does revision of their piece based on all that great input from the workshop group. When all is said and done, however, you have to remember that you are the god of your own piece of writing. You can take everybody else's thoughts in, but ultimately it's your voice and your choice, and that's what is going to be the final say on what happens in that poem or piece of fiction when we get to fiction later. So I hope that made a lot of sense to you and that you're getting the idea. It's going to be a little bit different in a digital sort of a setup, but I think it'll work just fine. Okay, last point that I want to make to you is that preparation for workshop is really of paramount importance. So from the writer's point of view, I want you to make sure that the piece of writing that you are giving to your group is something that you think has potential, and also that you've done everything to it that you know to do. If you already know 20 things you want to do to it, then very likely your workshop group is going to tell you those 20 things and they didn't help you at all because you knew you had to do that anyway. So the idea is that you revise it, you polish it, you get it as good as you can get it, and then you bring it to your workshop group and they help you take it from good to great. They help you take it from where you knew you could take it to where they're able to maybe see some other things that you could do with it. On the part of the workshopper, the person who is giving feedback, remember that if you want other people to take your work seriously, you have to take theirs seriously. That's that sowing and reaping factor as well. And so I want you to really take time to provide the line editing and the big picture feedback and really be prepared for a robust discussion when you get with your group. And I promise you, if you pour into this, it's going to be really rewarding and very fun. I have workshop groups that are so bonded to each other that they stay connected even when they go to college. Sometimes they have reunions. I've had people send me pictures from dorm rooms where people have gathered from around campus and said, oh, our workshop group is back together. And so this is really going to be an important group of people for you, especially since we are doing remote learning right now. This is your core group within this class, your core group of people. So you're going to get together with them on Thursday and on Friday of this week, and more instructions on that will be in Google Classroom. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day. As we're finishing here, I just encourage you to take this question here and do a little bit of reflecting. You can do it right in your journal. And then also to set some goals, and you're much more likely to achieve a goal that you have written down. So if you want to take just 5 minutes right now to do a little bit of reflecting and to write some goals for workshop, that would be amazing. Thank you so much, and I will see you later.